The book is all about what is technology going to do to the human race, and are we going to like what it does, its impacts on the human race. And so what that means is I've spent 2 years thinking about this whole concept of the digital transformation and what's happening to us. And what I want to do is just share some thoughts around that with you for the time remaining, just as kind of the way to end the conference. One of the things that I think is going to be interesting is if you look forward 100 years or so, and you think about how history will be taught. The history teachers are going to have students in class, and they're going to be talking about this huge digital transformation that happened over the last, by that time, let's say in 100 years, they'll say the last 120 years. And when they teach that, they'll be talking to the students and they'll say, look, there was before the internet and after the internet. And before the internet will be thought of as like the dark ages. I mean, that's how young people will see it. And so the history teacher will say things like, hey, when it came to getting information, the way people got information was they had to go to a library. And they had to pull out books, right? And that'll seem extremely crude to young people. And if they didn't have a book, what they did was they had to ask somebody, like they would ask their parents for information. And the kids will say, they ask their parents? You're kidding me. Now, even in the research I was doing for the book that I just wrote, I would go ask 8 to 10-year-olds. I would say, who do you trust more when you need information, your parents or the internet? What do you think they said? Internet. Very good. You have a pretty smart audience, right? It was amazing. Even at that age, they didn't trust their parents as much as they trust this magic box. I mean, they have this little magic box that they could ask any question any time and get an answer. And they trust that magic box today more than they trust their parents, which I find, very interesting. Or you think about how interconnected everything is today. We'll talk a little bit more about how connected things are. Right? But we live in a time where technology is connecting things that have never been connected before. Devices, people, organizations. I mean, we're being connected so that data flows or information flows in ways we've never been connected before. Or you think about digital relationships, how technology is changing in the commercial world. It's digital marketing, as you've heard for 2 days, right? Digital marketing is changing the relationship with people, between a brand and people. Now, in our personal lives, technology is also changing relationships quite a bit. Not too long ago, I was giving a talk in Silicon Valley, and I happened to be speaking right after the guy who started eHarmony, right? The older guy that you see on TV. And I'm listening to him. I'm there an hour early, so I'm listening to him talk, but I'm not paying a lot of attention because when I found my wife, there was no eHarmony and no match, right? I found her the way it used to be, which was I found her at work. Right? Now, it was interesting because he's talking, and I'm not listening until the end. He starts giving some statistics. And one of the statistics he gave, which was quite interesting to me, was they had studied 20,000 marriages that had started because of eHarmony. And they were checking to see how many had stayed married. And the percentage of divorces amongst the 20,000 marriages was only 3.8%. I know, that's what I thought. I thought, wow, right? Because normally, we know the divorce rate is around 50%. So 3.8%, that's pretty good, which means that maybe eHarmony is much better at helping you pick a spouse than a lot of us did when we picked our spouse. Now, I am a bit of a statistical kind of guy, though, so I started thinking about that figure, and I thought, well, wait a minute. eHarmony is not that old yet. And so these marriages haven't been around that long. Give them time. They'll get divorced, right? It'll go up. Right? And so maybe that number's not as good as I thought. But then I thought, well, that's being kind of jaded. But my point is, technology has changed some very fundamental things in our life. How we learn, how we get information, how we learn, where we learn from, how connected we are, our relationships. It's also changed how much is being automated and how productivity is changing. So when we talk about things being automated, processes that used to be done by humans are more and more being done by technology. And we're not just talking about building a car in a Toyota plant with robots. I mean, we're talking about HR processes, accounting processes, right? Marketing processes. I mean, we're automating the marketing process today. Where in a lot of cases, we're using technology to build a relationship where a human being used to build a relationship. Right, so we're automating things, and of course that's changing. It's transforming the world quite a bit when we automate things that now humans don't have to do anymore. Or you think about mobility, right? How mobility has changed things. So we all carry smart devices now, right? We carry these little magic boxes that let us connect to things. Yep, give me yours. Let me have it. I know he's got one, right? Because he spent a lot of time looking at it while I'm talking, right? So we're going to use his device. But we think about mobile devices. You know, psychologists say these things are like an outboard brain. Like they're becoming an outboard brain to us. And it's something we need to understand, that concept that these are becoming an outboard brain. Now, psychologists give us 3 reasons why. One reason, they store memory for us. So these devices store memory, so we don't have to just store it here, we store it here. Phone numbers, addresses, birth dates, things like that. 2, they solve problems for us. So psychologists follow people around, and they look at when they have a problem, what do they do to solve the problem? High percentage of the time, they reach into this device to solve the problem. 3rd thing, it's access to huge amounts of information. So it used to be when we wanted information quickly, we went here. Today we go here or here. We make a very quick judgment. We either have it here or it's here. But it's in one of the 2 places. That's why they say this is becoming like an outboard brain. Now, in just 8-9 years that we've had these, we've become incredibly addicted to these devices. And we often kid around and laugh about kids and teenagers and how addicted to their device, how they sleep with their devices, right, how critical these things are. But these things represent that connection. And it isn't just kids, right, who are extremely addicted to these things. Now, you know, I walked out in the audience and I pulled Mike's phone. Now, I can tell you that the whole time I was up here, before I pulled this phone, his eyes were never on me. His eyes were looking down the entire time. I'll also tell you that ever since I grabbed this, his eyes have not left me. Okay? Which is just kind of my proof point, right, about how addicted adults are. And the longer I hold this, the more uncomfortable he's becoming. Now, all of this adds up to a word, if you haven't heard it before, called humology. Thank you. Yeah, I didn't even look at it. I was hoping to see best speaker today when I look, you know, no. Humology is a word that describes the blending of humans and technology to get a process done. And so the way I want you to think about this is that every process, I don't care whether it's building a car or hiring somebody or marketing, is now some combination of weaving together what technology does and what a human being does. What's important to understand is that there is a proper humological balance to everything. So after 2 days of hearing about, for instance, digital marketing techniques, how do we use content well? How do we do SEO? Right? You know, how do we make sure a website works the right way? An important thing to understand is that for the rest of our lives, in everything we do from a business standpoint, and even everything we do from a personal standpoint, we need to find the right balance, right? The right humological balance for that thing that we do. Let me give you an example. In the sales process, depending on what you're selling, human beings are really good at creating emotion and creating trust. So there might need to be a human being involved in the sales process at certain points. You can't use all email and website and automated marketing systems and content management systems. I mean, we can't use these engines to do the entire sale if we need a human being to provide trust somewhere along the way. If you think about healthcare, I'm not sure we're ready to walk into a room with a computer and have the computer say, well, put your hand here on this device, and then the computer to give us a prescription of what we should do. I don't know that we're there yet. We might be there someday. But most people today want to talk to a human being and say, here's what's wrong with me, and have a human being tell us an answer. Now, this humological balance, what we have to understand about this scale is as you go over to this side, T 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, what we're saying is that that's more and more technology oriented. There are good and bad things about this technology side. Now, on the technology side, technology is very replicable. It does the same thing exactly every time. It's very scalable worldwide. There's all kinds of things we like about it. There's also some negative things about technology. It doesn't have a lot of discretion, right? It's not good at sensing emotion. It's not very creative on its own. Go to the other side of the scale. You have the same thing, H1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right? You go over to that side of the scale, wonderful things about human beings. We are great at building relationships. Right? Technology is not great at building. Nice try. You ready? We'll get another one. Hey, hang on, the photographer's taking pictures. You ready? We have to have one good one. All right. So on this human side, you've got the ability now to sense emotion. You have the ability to be creative, to consolidate huge amounts of data and try to create meaning out of huge disparate kinds of data. So there's things you like on the side, but there are things we don't like about human beings, right? We have to pay you every 2 weeks. You require that. And you might not even show up every day, but we still have to pay you. You might even go to the competitors and take all our information over there. Some days you don't do what we ask. It's the craziest thing. We tell you what we want you to do, but you did what you wanted to do. Right? So there's some things we don't like about human beings as well. Right? No good and bad on the scale. I just want you to understand this concept of humology, of the fact that everything is becoming this blending of humans and technology to get something done. If you're going to be a good leader, then you'll have a really good sense of where should you be on the scale for the processes that you're in charge of. Now, I'm a technologist, right? So obviously, I live in that T world. I mean, that's the side that I love. But as I get older, as I write books like the book that I just wrote, I'm starting to understand the importance of balance, of understanding when technology plays a wonderful role, when humans play a wonderful role, and let's make sure we don't get that screwed up. Let me show you an example. So we can apply this to something like cars. I would argue that today, if you just kind of look at where we are today, a vehicle might be at a zero. In other words, you have to drive the car. You have to steer it, you have to push down on the gas, you have to pick where it goes. And now you can't go 80 miles an hour without the car, but the car goes nowhere without you. So I might say, you know, on our humological scale, where we sit today is around a zero. But if you get a new car today, there's some interesting things going on. Right, with the new cars, you have self-parking cars. You have cars that will automatically brake so they don't hit a car in front of them. You have cars that will hold you in a lane. So we got some interesting. So we've moved over on the scale a little bit with driving. But of course, as we all know, we can go all the way over, right, into the 4-point-somethings if we talk about a self-driving car. And so I'm just giving you a simple example of how a process changes. Right? The process of driving is changing. And as this process of driving changes, interesting things happen. Like, what are we going to do about auto insurance when we got self-driving cars and none of them crash? You don't need auto insurance anymore. Right? What about the collision people? What are we going to do with that? You know, and so whole industries change when the humological balance shifts. I'll tell you one of the interesting ones. The group that is the most worried about self-driving cars right now is the organ transplant people, because 75% of organ transplants come from car accidents. And they know that when we have self-driving cars and we stop having car accidents, where are we going to harvest all the livers and the corneas and the hearts? Right? So I just want you to understand this concept, right, as we kind of go through of how there is a humological balance and it is shifting. Now, when you don't understand concepts like this in technology, let's just talk about what happens when you don't understand digital transformation. Because for a living, I have to go work with a lot of clients. And at times I run into executives who get it, and I run into executives who do not get it. So here's a case study, right? Sears and LL Bean. Both of these companies were catalog companies. Both of the companies started pretty early in the last century. Now, all the way through the last century, these two companies grew, and they did pretty well. And they were big brand names that we all know. Now let's spin forward to what happens in the technology era. So we get to the technology era, and their fortunes change. And they start going backwards for the first time. Why? Because we got e-commerce. When we got e-commerce, the catalog model changed. It wasn't about mailing paper catalogs out to people anymore to drive revenue. Now it was, hey, you had to be able to drive people to a website, and you had to be able to do e-commerce. And as we kind of spin forward in the story, you look at what happened through the 90s, LL Bean bounces off the bottom. And they not only bounce off the bottom, I mean, you spin forward till just lately, and look at the difference. Now, what I always want to understand is kind of like, all right, so what happened there? What happened at this crux where there was a dramatic shift? All right, here's what happened. If you go and you pull some quotes and you look at what Sears was saying versus what LL Bean was saying, Sears was saying things like, we're trying to play catch up, or we're trying to take ideas from other people and just improve those ideas. In other words, their mantra was, we go 7th. We watch all the other retailers, we go 7th. Not a very good mantra, right, in a world of digital transformation. No, or you look at LL Bean, you look at what they were saying, right? They're using words like initiatives. They're investing hundreds of millions of dollars, right, in e-commerce. Now, I could pull out all kinds of case studies, right? We could talk about Kodak, and we could talk about Borders, we could talk about Blockbuster, we could talk about Spiegel Catalog, we could talk about all kinds of companies, right, that have gone out because they didn't understand the digital transformation and what it was going to do to their industry. And it's not done. There will be many other stories like the Sears, right, of people who don't get it. Now, there's a word for this. It's called digital Darwinism. So when you come to a conference like this, and they've worked very hard to provide a good slate of speakers for you to try to provide a bunch of information. And you can come to a conference like this and you can learn things and then go back and not get anything done, right? Or you can be a digital explorer. You can come learn things at a conference like this and you can go back and you can make a difference. If you don't, right, this is where digital Darwinism happens. It's where companies who might have been around for 60 years or 100 years or 50 years, who were going up and to the right for a long time, go over the top and start coming back down. And this is the kind of thing that happens. That's digital Darwinism. So let's talk for a second about what we're playing for, right? Why this happens. I just want to show you financially why this happens. So we go in and we study a lot of organizations. We get a chance to assess them on how well they're doing with technology in general. And what we always see is, if you say, here's 100% of what they should be doing, not bleeding edge. Now, I'm just talking about what is just obvious things you should be doing with technology today. Like, you should have a mobile app. It's time, right? Just looking at some basic things. What we normally find is companies are around 60%. That's about what they're doing. They've chosen to do about 60%. And it creates a gap. So there's a gap, and it's a risk gap. And it's important to understand this concept of a risk gap. I'll show it to you a different way here in a minute. But a risk gap is where opportunity is up here, and here's what you're doing. In that risk gap, you're risking a lot of things, right? You're risking profitability, you're risking survival in some cases, but you're risking how good is your customer relationship. A lot of what was talked about the last 2 days were tools and processes to be able to build a better relationship, right, with a customer or a member or a patient. If you don't use the tools that are available today, then you will have less of a relationship than a competitor can build. And there's a high cost to that. Now, if I gave it to you in terms of financial, so you can understand the numbers around this, right, of why you have, why you've got this whole process with the companies going out of business, here's why. There's a great study done by Capgemini and MIT Sloan. And the study was all, let's compare organizations who are fantastic at technology to organizations who are not good at it at all, and let's try to figure out why. And let's figure out what the financial difference is. And so they broke down roughly 600 different companies into these quadrants. One quadrant is the beginners. They're not that good at technology. They don't understand how to integrate it into their strategy, and even if they did, they don't go very fast. Or the fashionistas. The fashionistas are the people who just want to be cool. They read about stuff, and then they want it. They don't know how to do anything with it, but they read about it. So for us, the fashionistas are, we get these calls, and the calls go something like this. Scott, I'm going to need you to hook us up with some big data. And I go, okay. Well, what would you do with the big data if you had it? Well, we're not sure about that, but I just read an article in Fortune magazine, and it said that we need to get into some big data. So I'm going to need you to score me some big data. How much was that cost? That's a fashionista. right? Versus a conservative. A conservative is the classic, we want to go 7th, right? They'll make good decisions. It's just that they'll make it after 7 competitors do it, and they'll say, well, we're big, we'll catch up. But they never do. And someday they pay a price. And then there's a digerati. Now, the important thing to understand is, if you look at the financial results, if we just look at kind of the top 2, plus 9% in profitability for the digerati. But the fashionistas are plus 6, which you say, well, that's pretty good. That's called a technology halo, by the way. When you're early into technology, customers notice, and so they like you better, right? So that they got plus 6% with the digital halo just by going fast. But that doesn't really count. Look at profitability. That's where it really counts, not just revenue. Profitability, fashionistas, minus 11%. So that means that they spent a lot of money to get that big data. They just didn't know what to do with it. And so then it just hurt them on the bottom line. The most important number on there is that plus 26% profitability for the digerati. Now think about that. I mean, year after year, plus 26% higher profit than your competitors. That's what being good at technology earns you. That's what understanding the digital transformation gets you. This is why people who are not good at technology, companies that are not good at it, that's why they die. Because they become unprofitable at some point. Now, let me show you a different way of why this happens. In this dynamic, this was one that we've seen over and over again for the last decade. The pace of technology is speeding up, right? So it's climbing exponentially. I don't think it will forever, by the way. But right now, the pace of change is going up exponentially. But the pace at which companies can adopt it, it's logarithmic. Now, it's logarithmic because either a company fails, which means they're not even on this chart, or they're successful. If a company is successful, the reason that they slow down their ability to change, they get big and bureaucratic, or they get arrogant about the fact that they're winning. And they go, well, we're doing so well, why would we need to change? Now, this is what causes companies to only change logarithmically. But you can see the problem. There is this gap, there's this opportunity gap. But again, it's a risk, right? There's a risk there. In this case, a strategy risk, because the opportunity to use technology is going up, but your ability to use it is flattening out. This is what gets companies in trouble. But interestingly, larger organizations that are making money are so arrogant about, oh, well, we're going to make money forever. It's always going to work. Right up until the moment it does not. And then they learn, and then they look around and go, wow, that going 7th thing didn't actually work out so well. And it happens at different times in different industries, by the way. So you've got to be high beam. We talk a lot about this concept of being high beam. You have to be able to see out into the future further than everybody else around you. And then you have to be able to make investments in that future. But seeing into the future isn't always easy. Because a lot of times we can have the seed of the future that's planted, we're just not willing to accept it. So let me show a video to you and I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to show you a video that talks a little bit about the future, but it's a future that a lot of you are not going to want to accept. So when you watch the video, you're going to go, I don't know about that. Right.
There's this idea floating around which I totally buy. It's this notion that we are already cyborgs. People are so dystopian when they think about the future of technology. What they fail to realize is that we have been in a feedback loop, in a self-amplifying feedback loop with our technologies since the origin of language and stone tools, for Christ's sakes. We use our technologies to extend the boundaries of what we are. Our tools are our exoskeletons. They are scaffoldings, extending our thought, reach, and vision, as Andy Clark says. There's a book by Andy Clark called Natural Born Cyborgs, and him and David Chalmers, they coined the extended mind thesis, which is this idea that we're literally extending the boundaries of the human mind with these technologies. Our smartphones are extensions of our cognition. They are examples of distributed intelligence. iPhone, therefore I am. I mean, literally. And this idea that our second skin is our technology. It's our turtle shell. It's our exoskeleton is sort of blurs the boundary of sort of saying that there's nature and then there's technology, and that that in fact it's all on a continuum, and we just smack in the middle between the born and the made, as Kevin Kelly says. But even Nietzsche used to say man is a bridge and not an end. We are a means towards self-extension. Our technologies become part of our skin. We must get over our skin bag bias. The biological skin bag is just one membrane. Our cells have membranes too, but our body's still a part of us and our tools are a part of us. We transcend membranes. We extend ourselves. That's what we do. We are already cyborgs.
That's an idea that's hard for people to accept. You know, I think biological skin bags. We have to get over being biological skin bags. This is just a concept that's hard for people to accept, is that, hey, with the tools we already have, with the outboard brain, this really crude, by the way, outboard brain that we already have in our hands, because it is really crude at this point, like the concept that we're going to integrate with technology, and the concept of going all the way up to, let's say, transhumanism, is hard for people to accept. But this is what is hard about being high beam. Right, about understanding that technology is changing so rapidly and we're losing the opportunity in many cases. Let me just kind of go forward a little bit. Let's talk about connection, and I'll show you what I mean. So there is a concept that I've been talking about for years about a connection, right? Technology and connection and how it changes things. And so let me present the concept to you. Web 1.0, right, was connecting organizations with their constituents. So having websites allowed us to talk to anyone anywhere in the world. It brought us e-commerce, and it changed the dynamics of life completely when we had the web. We had a way to connect with each other that we had never had before. So when we talk about, well, we got e-commerce, big deal. Well, you know, it was a big deal to certain industries. You know, I mean, we just talked about the catalog industry. I mean, when we got e-commerce, the catalog industry, you either went up or you died. I mean, that was the impact that it had. Right? But we were able to connect with people, organizations with people in a way we never had before. We've got one foot in Web 2.0, one foot in Web 3.0. Web 2.0 can be thought of as connected people. So any of us now can connect with millions of people anywhere in the world instantly. Now, I want you to think about that for a second. Those of you who are old enough, I mean, you come from my generation. When I was young, if you wanted to try to talk to 1 million people, that was virtually impossible, unless you could write a big check. No, but today, anyone in this room can post something online and hit a button and talk to 1 million people instantly for free. Right? This is a monumental thing, that we have an ability to connect with each other. This has driven citizen journalism. This has driven all kinds of concepts that we never had before, because we're able to connect with each other anywhere in the world for free instantly. Now, next stage that we have a foot in, of course, is connected devices. This is the Internet of Things, or machine to machine, M to M. Right, so this is the ability for every device to be connected to every other device, or every device to be connected to us. And this is a stage that, you know, people say is the next big thing. It will feel like devices come alive. I mean, that is what it will feel like. Today, we already have Nest and Google trying to create all kinds of smart devices in our home, so that those devices can talk to us and they can tell us the state of the home, right? Or they can talk to somebody else, right? We have clients that are building furniture for kids, and so they have for a while been thinking about, well, how do you build a smart crib? And what would a smart crib say? So if you're a mom and you buy a smart crib, what do you want the smart crib to tell you? That the heart's still beating? That there's still weight in the bottom, that your child hasn't climbed out over the top? But I mean, I have all kinds of clients that are asking this question. What's a smart crib? What's a smart car seat? What's a smart sprinkler? What's a smart pool heater? Right? Everyone wants to understand what's a smart, because when we understand that, we understand how we can connect devices together, which not only gives us an interesting ability to control things around us or automate things around us, it gives us huge amounts of data that we've never had before coming off of all these devices. So that's the world that we're coming into, which then leads us into this fourth world. Right? In this fourth stage, think of rivers of information. Think of real-time flows of data that are flowing all over the world that you can tap into anytime you want. Think about the fact that you will have a piece of software that allows you to look out and look at thousands of streams of information. Now, when I say that, I'm talking about information streaming off of everything at your house, information streaming off of your kids, information streaming off your car, right? And then information streaming about the Premier League, soccer league in Europe, or any other subject. But thousands of streams of real-time data that you would pull into your engine, and you would write rules. And you'd say, all right, if my child goes outside of 10 miles of this radius, I want an immediate notification. If my child's heart rate goes above X, I want immediate notification. But think about, you'll spend hours and hours cultivating these flows of information with rules and boundaries so that you can monitor what's going on in your life. That's going to be stage 4. Stage 5, we could argue, is probably all the way up into people being connected with devices and moving into that kind of transhumanism world. Right? Transhumanism, if you're not familiar with the term, transhumanism just means we have gained so much ability and power through integrating our devices with us that we're not the same species anymore. If you were to compare the power that we will have in 30 or 40 years with what we would have had 100 years ago, you compare a human being, it's not a human being anymore, right? We have become transhuman. Now, these are the kinds of things, like people don't want to think about these things. People, cyborgs being cyborgs or transhumanism. When I tell you it's hard to look forward into the future, this is why. Because we can accept a nicer, Apple Watch coming out. We can accept a bigger iPad. I mean, we can accept these things that are right in front of us. But it's so hard to accept something that might be down the road 10 years. Although, somehow we should understand that 20 years ago, if you would put an iPhone in somebody's hand, I mean, it would have literally been a magic box to them. Just 20 years ago. I mean, that kind of power. You think about the fact that when you today can talk to Siri or talk to a device, and it just gives you answers. What would that have looked like 20 years ago? And it's so hard for us to extrapolate that out and say, well, in 20 years, what will we have? All right? But that's the process of being high beam. So I just wanted you to kind of understand, we're connecting things that have never been connected before. And it'll continue to happen over our lifetime. Now, if we apply this a little bit, right? We apply Humalogy and we apply connections, and we just talk about marketing, for example. Then we can go to something David mentioned earlier. I think yesterday David made some comment about relationships, and he talked about the change from doing transactions to building relationships. This is one of the pieces of transformation that's going on. That if you're out selling anything, if you're selling a product, if you're selling a service, then you're in this loop where you should be moving from just doing transactions to building relationships. Now, the reason that is important is if you look back in time, you go back 150 years ago, we did business with people who were right around us. Right? We did business with the person at the corner store. I mean, we had relationships with the people we did business with. Even 30 years ago, when we bought car insurance, somebody stood in our kitchen and sold us car insurance. How do we buy car insurance today? Exactly. It's moved away from a human connection, but the problem is that has completely commoditized that industry. And if you want to win now in that industry, you have to figure out, well, how do you build a relationship with people so that you're not just a commodity? You can't just be Geico, funny commercials, be online. You have to figure out how to build a relationship with people now. It doesn't matter whether you're selling flowers, whether you're a hospital, whether you're a law firm. You got to understand how to just stop doing transactions and how to build relationships using technology. Now, that's where you got to find that humological balance, because depending on what you do for a living, there is a percentage of the connection that probably ought to be electronic and a percentage that ought to be human. Let me give you an example, an easy humological example. When we talk about building relationships, if I said Amazon, and I said, think about the scale, T1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or H1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Where on the scale is Amazon's sales model? Where is it? What score would you give it?
4.
A what for? Very good. Exactly. I agree with you. They're way over on the T. How many people here have bought a lot of things from Amazon and you've never once talked to an Amazon employee? Ever. Think about that. Right? You're spending thousands of dollars with a website, with a brand, and you know none of the human beings. All right, let's go to a funeral home. What score would you give a funeral home? Where's a funeral home on the Humalogy scale as far as their sales process?
H5.
Yeah, it's way over on the H side, right? Because when somebody dies, we want that empathy. right? We want their advice. We want them to help us. We're not ready to go on Amazon and buy a casket, right? And then click and have Jeff Bezos pick up the body, right? Fly it with a drone over to the cemetery. Right? We're not ready for that today, right? We might in a few years, right? But I just want you to understand, you know, building relationships is a great example of starting to mix these concepts I'm talking to you about. When we talk about digital marketing, when you talk about digital marketing, all the things you've talked about for the last couple of days, we got to understand that we got to find the right blend. You know, this is from a Forrester report, and it's just talking about the shift from technology investments in what are called systems of record to systems of engagement, and how we're shifting the amount of money that's being spent on technology. It's shifting towards systems of engagement. If you work in an organization that is not making this shift, in other words, 90% of your budget is still on backside software that makes your job easier, as opposed to front-side software that makes it easier for your customer, you got a problem. And we still see a bunch of companies that way. We say, give us your budgets, show us what you're spending money on. High percentage on their backside operation, which is wonderful. That makes your job easier. Right? That doesn't help your customers at all. So let's talk about relationships for a second, right? And how important those are. Consumers today, when we go out and talk to consumers, what a lot of consumers say is, we feel like we're meat with a wallet. In other words, we don't really feel like these people care about us. They just want to sell their services. Now, if you want to build relationships with people, you have to get out of that trap. You have to be able to use digital marketing and human beings to try to get people to understand that you actually care about them. Now, I can give you a lot of interesting statistics around this. I'll tell you one. There was a study recently done where they asked CEOs, what percentage of your customers would say they have a good relationship with you, and they're very loyal to you and they like you. The CEOs said 80% of our customers feel that way. They went and they surveyed the customers and said, are you loyal? How do you feel about this brand? Guess what they said? 8% said they were. Now that's a bit of a distance. 80% and 8%. Let me tell you why. There's some questions we will normally ask people, right, about this, about building relationships. We'll say, do you really care about your customers? I mean, do you really love your customers, your clients, your patients? You know, hospitals, they are a great example of this. You know, they run all these ads about how much they love their patients. Really? And so, you know, we'll say things like, all right, well, let's ask you a few questions. Do you love them when they're not doing a transaction? And how would they know that? And what we find out is a lot of companies, the only time you engage is when you're trying to sell something, or right after you've sold something, right? But other than that, you build no relationship. Crickets are chirping. We just worked with a big insurance organization on Monday or Tuesday, and we were studying their customer journey. And we got to the onboarding stage, right, which is the stage after the transaction stage. And we said, what do you do in the onboarding stage? So somebody buys a policy from you, what do you do then in the first 90 days? And they said, nothing. And why not? Why don't you build a relationship with these people? We closed the sale. I mean, we sold the policy. So we accomplished what we were trying to accomplish. If they need help, you know, we'll pay a claim. But our job is done. We got a policy. I mean, that's the psychology. In other words, they don't really care about the people because they haven't done the, you know, they're not getting ready to do another transaction. Or we'll say, do you care enough about people to gather data? Too many people we run into look at customer data as, boy, we gather the minimum possible, right? Well, and the argument is, well, we don't want people to think we're being creepy or that we're invading their privacy, so we gather the minimum amount of data. Like, really? When you gather the minimum amount of data, you don't know them. You can't customize how you talk to them. Right? You can't do some of the interesting you know, automated marketing that we've been talking about the last couple of days. Or an even tougher question, do you care more about them than you care about money? Now, every organization, and you can think about this for your organization, every organization has to care about one more than the other. I mean, either you, in your heart, care more to be a blessing to your customers and serve your customers, or you care more about being profitable and making money. Now, the interesting thing is, a lot of times organizations who care more about being a blessing to their customers, they're more successful. But when we go in and assess organizations, they reek of one or the other. Either they are absolutely going to make money whether you do or not, or else they absolutely are trying to be a blessing to their customers, and thereby they make money. Now this shows up in digital marketing, because what we'll do is we'll say, all right, so we got your name. What's your name?
Brandon.
Brandon? Okay, so Brandon, you bought something from us and we got your name. All right, for the next 90 days, you're going to find out which one of these we are. Because if we're just out for the money, right, if the money's really the most important thing, I'm going to tell you how much I love you, Brandon, but I'm going to send you 21 emails trying to sell you something else. That's what my digital marketing is going to be. Now, if I'm the other way and I'm trying to be a blessing to you, you're going to get a video in 24 hours from our CEO that says, hey, welcome to our family. We're so happy that you've done business with us. You know, we appreciate it, and you know, it's going to be a nice video. In another 3 or 4 days, you're going to get a PowerPoint from us, the 10 things you need to know about X. It's going to be really helpful to you, right, in what you're doing. But we're going to have an echo, a content echo, that's a 3-month content echo that doesn't sell you anything. All it does is try to help you in whatever field I'm in. We're just trying to be a blessing to you. That's how you're going to know which one you really care about, right? Now, so when you learn everything about digital marketing, what I would tell you is be careful how you point and shoot it. Because if you learn all these lessons and all you do is pound me with 21 emails about how to buy more from you, I pretty much know where you are. And now let's talk about how you feel about our relationship. It's easy to say you're going to build relationships. It's much tougher to try to do that. So that leaves me to just go back to transformation. When you think about what's got to happen now with transformation, and you think about something like that, just what I just told you about, we have to move from doing transactions to building relationships, you might ask, in an organization, who is responsible for the overall relationship? And you'll find out that that's a tough question, because it's spread out. But what I am interested in these days are doing things like, let's rename the marketing department the relationship department. Why is it called marketing? Marketing was creating demand, and I get that, but the world's changed now. Now what we want from a marketing department is we want you to build a relationship. So let's change the name of it. Let's call it the relationship department, and let's give it that mission. Let's have the mission not be that, hey, I just sell you one other thing. It's that I created a lifelong relationship with you.